In the autumn of 1851, in Natchez, Mississippi, something happened that exposed the darkest complexities of power and desire in the antebellum South. An enslaved man named Marcus, a master and mistress who both became obsessed with him, and a spiral of jealousy, possession, and destruction that ended with 3 lives ruined and secrets that respectable society desperately wanted buried. If stories about the hidden dynamics of slavery matter to you, about how power and desire twisted together in ways that destroyed everyone involved, then stay with me, because what happened to Marcus between 1849 and 1851 tells you everything you need to know about possession, about obsession, and about how the system of slavery enabled abuse from every direction. The year 1849 sits in the wealthiest period of Mississippi's plantation economy. Cotton prices were high. Natchez was one of the richest cities in America, filled with millionaire planters who lived in mansion houses and controlled thousands of acres. The wealth was staggering, and it was all built on the labor of enslaved people who had no control over their own bodies or destinies. Marcus was born around 1828 on a plantation in Louisiana. By 1849, he was 21 years old and had already been sold twice. He was what slave traders called fancy, light-skinned, attractive, intelligent, trained in household service. These characteristics made him valuable and also made him vulnerable to particular kinds of exploitation. In April 1849, Marcus was purchased at auction in Natchez by a couple named Thomas and Josephine Crawford. The Crawfords were wealthy even by Natchez standards. Thomas had inherited 3 plantations totaling over 5,000 acres, and Josephine came from old Charleston money. They lived in a mansion called Belmont, employed 40 house servants, and hosted elaborate social events. Thomas Crawford was 38 years old in 1849, handsome, charming, with a reputation as a sophisticated man of culture. He collected art, read philosophy, considered himself more enlightened than the typical plantation owner. Josephine Crawford was 32 years old, beautiful, educated, bored with her life of leisure. She'd been raised in Charleston society, had married Thomas when she was 19, had produced 2 children who were now being raised primarily by enslaved nurses. She spent her days managing the household, attending social functions, and searching for something to relieve the monotony of her existence. The Crawfords purchased Marcus to work as a personal attendant, someone to serve at their dinner parties, to attend them when they traveled, to be a visible symbol of their wealth and taste. They paid an exceptionally high price for him, which tells you something about why they wanted him. Marcus arrived at Belmont in May 1849. He was brought to the main house, shown his quarters in the servants' wing, introduced to the other house slaves who would train him in his duties. For the first few weeks, Marcus learned the routines of the household. He served meals, attended to guests, helped Thomas dress for social events, assisted Josephine with various household tasks. He was capable, intelligent, learned quickly. Thomas and Josephine both noticed him. How could they not? Marcus was striking, tall, well-built, with features that reflected his mixed ancestry. In a household full of servants, he stood out. Thomas's interest came first. About 6 weeks after Marcus arrived, Thomas began finding reasons to keep Marcus near him. He'd request Marcus specifically to serve his meals, to accompany him on rides around the plantation, to attend him in his study while he worked. The other servants noticed. They'd seen this pattern before with previous attractive slaves. They knew what Thomas's particular attention meant. Some of them tried to warn Marcus quietly. Be careful. Watch yourself. Master Thomas has certain appetites that don't follow the usual patterns. Marcus understood. He'd been enslaved long enough to recognize when a master's interest went beyond normal household service. He'd experienced it before at previous plantations. He knew there was nothing he could do to prevent what was coming. The first assault happened in July 1849. Thomas summoned Marcus to his private study late one evening, ostensibly to help organize some papers. Once Marcus was there, Thomas locked the door and made his intentions clear. Marcus tried to refuse. "Master Thomas, I don't think—" "You don't need to think," Thomas interrupted. "You need to do what I tell you. That's what you're here for. I'm here to serve the household. You're here because I bought you. You belong to me. Your body is mine to use however I choose. Do you understand?" Marcus understood. He had no power to refuse. Thomas owned him legally, completely. Resistance would mean punishment, possibly being sold to worse conditions. So Marcus submitted, letting his mind go somewhere else, while Thomas did what he wanted. Afterward, Thomas was almost tender. "You're special, Marcus. Beautiful. I'll take good care of you as long as you understand your place. This will be our arrangement. You'll serve me in all ways, and I'll make sure you're treated well." Marcus returned to his quarters, feeling hollowed out. The other servants saw his face and knew what had happened. A woman named Ruth, who'd been at Belmont for 20 years, brought him water and spoke quietly. "I'm sorry, child. Master Thomas has always been this way. Had other young men before you. Most don't last long. They get sold away when he gets tired of them or when Mistress Josephine notices. She knows. She knows what he is. Doesn't like it, but tolerates it as long as he's discreet. You just keep your head down. Do what he wants. Hope you survive it." But Marcus's situation was about to become more complicated than Ruth could have imagined, because Josephine Crawford was also noticing Marcus. Josephine had been aware of her husband's tendencies for years. She knew Thomas preferred men, that their marriage was primarily for show and for producing heirs. She'd made peace with it, found her own ways to cope with a loveless marriage. But seeing Marcus, young, beautiful, becoming the focus of Thomas's attention, awakened something in Josephine. Jealousy, perhaps, or desire of her own, or maybe just the need to assert her own power in a marriage where she often felt powerless. Josephine began finding reasons to keep Marcus near her. She'd request him to attend her during the day, while Thomas was managing plantation business. She'd have Marcus help her dress, brush her hair, attend her during her afternoon routine. Marcus recognized this pattern too. He'd heard stories about plantation mistresses who developed obsessions with enslaved men, though it was less common than masters with enslaved women. The dynamic was just as exploitative. The enslaved person still had no power to refuse. In September 1849, Josephine made her move. She summoned Marcus to her private sitting room one afternoon when Thomas was away on business in Natchez. "Marcus, I want you to understand something," Josephine began. "My husband has you in the evenings, but during the day, you belong to me. Do you understand?" "Mistress Crawford, I'm not sure what you mean." "Don't play innocent. I know what Thomas does with you. I've always known about his preferences. But you're in my household too, and I have needs of my own." Marcus felt trapped. "Mistress, I can't." "You can, and you will, unless you'd prefer I sell you to the sugar plantations in Louisiana. I've heard life expectancy there is about 3 years. Is that what you want?" Marcus understood he had no choice. Josephine had the same absolute power over him that Thomas did. He couldn't refuse either of them without facing terrible consequences. So Marcus became something unprecedented in his experience. He was being sexually exploited by both the master and the mistress of the household. Thomas would summon him in the evenings. Josephine would claim him during the afternoons. And Marcus had to submit to both, had to serve their desires while maintaining the appearance of a simple household servant. The other enslaved people at Belmont watched this situation develop with horror and fascination. They'd seen masters exploit enslaved women. They'd occasionally seen masters with enslaved men. But they'd never seen a situation where both master and mistress were competing for the same enslaved person. Ruth tried to offer Marcus advice. This can't end well. When white folks get obsessed like this, when they start competing over someone, it always ends badly for the enslaved person caught in the middle. What am I supposed to do? Marcus asked. I can't refuse either of them. I know. That's what makes it so terrible. You got no choice but to ride it out and hope you survive. The situation escalated over the following months. Thomas and Josephine both became increasingly possessive of Marcus. Thomas would get angry if he thought Marcus was spending too much time attending to Josephine. Josephine would become cold and threatening if she felt Thomas was monopolizing Marcus's time. They began making demands that were specifically designed to keep Marcus away from the other. Thomas would send Marcus on errands that would take all day, keeping him from Josephine's afternoon claims. Josephine would assign Marcus tasks that required him to stay close to the main house during evening hours when Thomas usually summoned him. Marcus was caught between them, trying to satisfy both while knowing it was impossible. The stress was wearing him down. He barely slept. Thomas often kept him until late at night, and Josephine would summon him early in the morning. He was losing weight, looked exhausted, moved through his days in a fog of fatigue and despair. The other servants tried to help when they could, covering for Marcus when he was too tired to complete his tasks, bringing him food when he missed meals. But there was only so much they could do. The fundamental problem that Marcus was being exploited by two powerful people who saw him as property rather than a person couldn't be solved by sympathetic peers. By early 1850, the tension between Thomas and Josephine over Marcus had become obvious to everyone in the household. They fought about Marcus constantly, though they disguised the arguments as being about household management or Marcus's work assignments. Why does he need to accompany you to town? Josephine demanded one morning. Because I need an attendant, and he's my personal servant, Thomas replied. He's not just your servant. He belongs to the household. I need him here today. For what? To brush your hair. Surely one of the maids can do that. Don't you dare dismiss my needs as trivial. I'm the mistress of this house, and I decide how household servants are assigned. And I'm the master of this plantation, and I bought Marcus specifically to attend me. The arguments continued, escalating in intensity and frequency. The children noticed that their parents were constantly fighting. The house servants walked on eggshells, trying to avoid getting caught in the crossfire. Marcus himself was deteriorating. The dual exploitation, the constant tension, the impossible demands. It was breaking him down physically and psychologically. He began to wonder if he should try to run away. Even though he knew the chances of successful escape from Mississippi were almost non-existent. Then the situation took an even darker turn. In April 1850, Thomas and Josephine apparently reached some kind of agreement. Instead of fighting over Marcus, they would share him, explicitly, together. Marcus was summoned to the master bedroom one evening and found both Thomas and Josephine waiting for him. They explained the new arrangement. Marcus would attend them both, simultaneously, serving both their desires at once. It was degrading in ways that Marcus's previous experiences hadn't been. Being exploited by one person was terrible. Being exploited by two at once, being treated as an object for their joint gratification, was somehow worse. It reduced him even further, made him feel less than human in ways he hadn't experienced before. The shared arrangement continued for months. 2 or 3 times a week, Marcus would be summoned to the master bedroom to attend both Thomas and Josephine. They treated it as entertainment, as a game, as if Marcus's participation was somehow voluntary rather than coerced. The psychological damage was profound. Marcus stopped speaking unless directly questioned. He moved through his days mechanically, performing tasks automatically, his mind shutting down to protect itself from the reality of what was happening to him. Ruth watched him deteriorating and felt helpless. "You got to hold on," she told him one night. "I know it's terrible. I know you want to give up, but you got to survive this." "Why?" Marcus asked. "What's the point of surviving this?" "Because someday this system will end. Someday we'll be free. And when that day comes, you need to be alive to see it." Marcus wanted to believe her, but in 1850, in Mississippi, freedom seemed like an impossible fantasy. The obsession that Thomas and Josephine had developed with Marcus wasn't just sexual. It was possessive, consuming, destructive. They began to see him as something precious they shared, something that bound them together in their otherwise failing marriage. They started making plans for Marcus's future. They would never sell him. They would keep him at Belmont permanently. When their children inherited the plantation, Marcus would be specifically designated as property that stayed with the main house, ensuring he could never be separated from them. Marcus heard these plans and understood he was trapped for life. There would be no sale to another plantation that might be better or worse. No chance of being sold to someone traveling north who might be persuaded to free him. He would spend the rest of his life at Belmont, being exploited by the Crawfords until age or illness made him no longer desirable. The realization pushed Marcus to a breaking point. In July 1850, he attempted suicide by drinking laudanum he'd stolen from Josephine's medicine cabinet. He was discovered by Ruth before the dose could kill him. She forced him to vomit, saved his life, then hid what had happened so the Crawfords wouldn't know. "Don't you ever do that again," Ruth said fiercely. "I know it's bad. I know you're suffering. But suicide ain't the answer. That's letting them win. You survive. You outlast them. You show them they can't break you, no matter what they do." Marcus survived, but something inside him had fundamentally changed. He stopped feeling, stopped caring, stopped being present in his own life. He became what the Crawfords wanted, a beautiful object for their use, without thoughts or feelings or resistance. Thomas and Josephine noticed the change, but misinterpreted it. They thought Marcus had finally accepted his role, had submitted completely to their ownership. They were pleased with his docility, his compliance, his apparent contentment with the arrangement. They didn't recognize that they'd broken him, that the person Marcus had been was gone, replaced by an empty shell going through motions. The situation continued through the rest of 1850 and into 1851. Thomas and Josephine's obsession with Marcus remained intense. If anything, it deepened. They became jealous of any time Marcus spent away from them, even time he needed for basic rest or food. Other wealthy families in Natchez began to notice something strange about the Crawfords. They were less social than before, declined invitations, seemed preoccupied with their household affairs. When they did attend events, they brought Marcus with them and kept him constantly nearby, as if they couldn't bear to let him out of their sight. Rumors started circulating. People whispered about the Crawfords' unusual attachment to their servant. Some suspected the truth about Thomas's relationship with Marcus. A few noticed Josephine's possessive behavior as well, but Southern propriety prevented anyone from raising the subject directly. In September 1851, the situation finally collapsed. Thomas and Josephine had been fighting again, this time about whether Marcus should accompany Thomas to New Orleans on a business trip or stay at Belmont with Josephine. The argument escalated into physical violence, with Thomas striking Josephine, and Josephine retaliating by throwing objects at Thomas. In the chaos of their fight, Josephine said something that revealed the full extent of their arrangement. "He's mine, as much as he's yours. I've been with him just as often as you have. You don't get to take him away from me." The revelation that both Thomas and Josephine were sexually involved with Marcus, that they'd been sharing him, was overheard by several house servants. Within days, despite everyone's attempts to maintain secrecy, the story had spread through Natchez' enslaved community, and from there to some white households. The scandal was massive. Mississippi society could tolerate a lot. Masters with enslaved mistresses, even quiet rumors about men like Thomas who preferred other men. But a married couple openly sharing an enslaved man for their joint gratification. That violated too many social norms to be ignored. Thomas's business associates began distancing themselves. Josephine was cut by former friends. Dinner invitations stopped arriving. The Crawfords found themselves increasingly isolated, their reputation destroyed by the exposure of their obsession with Marcus. Thomas blamed Josephine for the exposure. Josephine blamed Thomas. Both, bizarrely, blamed Marcus, as if he'd somehow caused the situation rather than being its victim. In November 1851, Thomas made a decision. To end the scandal and restore some measure of reputation, he would sell Marcus. Send him far away, to Texas perhaps or Arkansas, somewhere the Crawfords would never see him again. It would be a sacrifice, losing the object of their shared obsession, but necessary to salvage their social standing. Josephine initially opposed the plan. She couldn't bear the thought of losing Marcus. But eventually, she recognized they had no choice. The scandal was destroying them. Marcus had to go. Marcus was informed of his impending sale with less than a day's notice. He would be taken to auction in Vicksburg, sold to whoever offered the highest price, sent away from Belmont forever. The other enslaved people at Belmont reacted to this news with mixed feelings. On one hand, they were relieved Marcus would be freed from the Crawfords' exploitation. On the other hand, they knew being sold to an unknown buyer could lead to even worse conditions. Ruth found Marcus on his last night at Belmont. "I'm sorry," she said. "Sorry for what they did to you. Sorry you got caught in their sickness. I hope wherever you go it's better than this." "It can't be worse," Marcus said quietly. "It can always be worse. But I'm going to pray it isn't. I'm going to pray you find a place where they just let you work and don't use you, where you can maybe heal from this." Marcus was taken to Vicksburg the next day and sold to a cotton planter from Arkansas. The new owner paid a high price. Marcus was still young, strong, appeared healthy despite his psychological damage. The new owner had no idea about Marcus's history with the Crawfords, saw him simply as valuable property. Marcus left Mississippi in chains, headed for Arkansas and an unknown future. Whether his new situation was better or worse than what he'd endured at Belmont, history doesn't record. What is recorded is what happened to Thomas and Josephine Crawford after Marcus's sale. The scandal didn't die just because Marcus was gone. If anything, it intensified. The story of the couple who'd shared an enslaved man became legendary in Natchez society. A cautionary tale about obsession, about the corruption that absolute power enabled, about respectable people behaving in ways that society found inexcusable. Thomas's business suffered. Associates stopped wanting to work with him. Contracts were terminated. His social and financial standing collapsed. Josephine was completely ostracized. No respectable woman would associate with her. She spent her days isolated in Belmont, cut off from the society she'd once been part of. The marriage, already damaged, dissolved completely. Thomas and Josephine lived in the same house, but stopped speaking to each other. They blamed each other for the scandal, for the loss of Marcus, for the destruction of their lives. In 1853, Josephine left Belmont and returned to her family in Charleston. Her parents took her in reluctantly, ashamed of the scandal, but unwilling to abandon their daughter completely. She lived out her days in Charleston, never remarrying, never recovering her previous social status. Thomas remained at Belmont, increasingly isolated and bitter. His plantations continued producing cotton, but he withdrew from society almost completely. He died in 1859, alone except for his enslaved workers, his reputation permanently destroyed. The story of Thomas and Josephine Crawford and their obsession with Marcus became one of those whispered tales that circulated through the South, a warning about what happened when power corrupted completely, when owners forgot the boundaries that were supposed to exist, when obsession destroyed everyone it touched. For Marcus, the legacy is less clear. After being sold to Arkansas, he disappears from historical records. There are no documents tracking his later life, no certainty about whether he survived the Civil War to see emancipation, no knowledge of whether he ever recovered from the psychological damage the Crawfords had inflicted. What we're left with is a story that reveals the darkest complexity of slavery's power dynamics. Marcus was caught between two people who both desired him, both felt entitled to his body. Both treated him as property rather than a person. He had no power to refuse either of them, no way to escape their obsession, no protection from their exploitation. The Crawfords destroyed themselves through their obsession with Marcus. But Marcus was destroyed first, reduced from a person with thoughts and feelings to an object passed between two people who saw him as a possession to be shared. This isn't a story about love or even desire in any meaningful sense. It's a story about power, about how absolute power over another person enables the darkest forms of exploitation, about how obsession can consume everyone involved, about how the enslaved people at the center of these dynamics suffered damage that would never heal. Remember this story. Remember that it happened in 1851, in one of the wealthiest cities in America, involving people who were respected members of society. Remember that it shows how slavery enabled exploitation from multiple directions, that enslaved people could be victimized by masters, by mistresses, by both simultaneously. Remember that Marcus had no power in any of this. He couldn't refuse Thomas or Josephine without facing terrible consequences. He couldn't escape their obsession. He couldn't protect himself from being caught between them as they competed for possession of his body. Remember that the Crawfords destroyed themselves, but Marcus was destroyed first, and more completely. That when he was sold away, he carried psychological damage that would likely never heal, trauma that would affect him for whatever remained of his life. The slave who was shared by master and mistress until obsession destroyed them all. It's a story about power and exploitation, about obsession and possession, about how slavery enabled the darkest forms of human behavior. It's part of our history, uncomfortable, disturbing, challenging every notion of propriety and decency that the antebellum South claimed to represent. Remember it, all of it. What do you think about Marcus's situation? Was he a victim of both Thomas and Josephine Crawford, or is the power dynamic more complicated than that? Could there have been any element of agency in relationships defined so completely by slavery's absolute power imbalance? When both master and mistress exploit the same enslaved person, who bears more responsibility? And does that question even make sense when both had absolute power over him? These questions resist easy answers. Marcus was legally property, owned completely by people who both exploited him sexually. He had no power to refuse, no recourse against their demands, no way to escape their obsession. Yet he was also a thinking, feeling person who had to find ways to survive impossible circumstances. The Crawfords' obsession destroyed their reputation and marriage, but Marcus paid the highest price, sold away carrying trauma that would never fully heal, his fate after that sale unknown and unrecorded. The people with power suffered social consequences. The person without power suffered everything. Leave your comment below. If you found this investigation compelling, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Share this with someone who appreciates historical narratives that resist simple moral categorization. The stories that challenge us to think about power, exploitation, and the complex dynamics of slavery are often the most important to preserve. At History in Chains, we believe in presenting history honestly, acknowledging that the past contains situations that modern moral frameworks struggle to adequately address, and preserving narratives that reveal how slavery enabled exploitation from multiple directions simultaneously. Marcus's story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about obsession and possession, about how enslaved people could be victimized by multiple owners at once, and about how the power dynamics of slavery created suffering that's difficult to fully comprehend. See you in the next video.